Welcome guys, just another quick tutorial on how to install Linux on a VMware platform. So basically, I know a lot of my tutorials are showing you how to use things like Squid. I'm going to do one on OpenVPN and a whole host of other items that I'm using in a virtualized environment. So there's multiple ways to virtualize hardware. There's two types. It's done on something called a hypervisor, and there's two types of hypervisors. There's a Type 1 hypervisor and a Type 2 hypervisor. Hypervisors is just a fancy way for saying a machine that hosts a virtual machine. A Type 1 hypervisor actually runs on the bare metal. So you actually would install the hypervisor software, such as ESXi, onto the computer, and then you install instances of operating systems onto the hypervisor, right into ESXi. A Type 2 hypervisor runs on top of an operating system. So you have, say, Windows running like I have in this case, and on top of Windows you install, in this case I'm going to use VM Player, but there's VirtualBox, other virtualization software. But the idea is that you install the hypervisor as a program in an already running operating system, and then you can run virtualization inside of that. There's pros and cons to both sides. A pro of a Type 1 hypervisor is it's going to completely be independent of any other OS. So you don't have to worry about your host Windows 7 operating system crashing and taking all of your virtual machines offline. Also, a Type 1 hypervisor tends to be a little bit quicker because, again, it's running on the bare metal. There's no layer between Windows 7 and the hypervisor, or VMware in this case. There's no layer there that slows things down, extra layers. So a benefit of a Type 2 hypervisor is that you get better hardware compatibility. In some cases, ESXi can be a little bit picky with like the network cards it will work with. If you're using a Type 2 hypervisor, all that's emulated and it makes things much more compatible. So there's pros and cons to both. In this case, what I want to show you guys how to do is install VMware Player, and then install, in this case, we're going to install Ubuntu Linux 14.04 LTS. Recently came out, a few months back. And also in a follow-up video, that's going to be a separate video, we're going to install OpenVPN on the VM that we just created. But this is just to give you an idea how to create a VM separate of installing OpenVPN on the VM machine. Lots of V's in there, I know. Okay, so in this case, what I'm going to be using for this little tutorial is VMware Player. So VMware Player is free from VMware. You just go to the VMware website /products/player, so vmware.com/products/player. If you go to the download link right at the top, I scroll down for no reason. So if you go to the download item and scroll right near the bottom, there is VMware Player. So you just click download product and it will download. Obviously, it choose what you're going to run it on. In this case, it'd be Windows, and it'll run. So I've already downloaded and installed the software. I'm going to assume you know how to download and install software at this point. So we'll close this out, get this out of the way for now. So I already have VMware open, or I should say installed on this computer. So we're going to open this up. Now what we're going to do is we're going to make a new virtual machine. I'm assuming you have just installed VMware Player. None of this will be here. So we're going to choose create a new virtual machine. First we have to choose where we are going to have where we downloaded the ISO files of Ubuntu from, which is another item I'll have to cover really quick. Glad I just mentioned that. So, easiest way is to go to ubuntu.com. So you just go to ubuntu.com, and then you choose the server item. and then download Ubuntu Server. And the most recent version is 14.0 for LTS. Again, you would download this. It's going to download an ISO or an image file. So, going back to this, we want to choose where we saved your ISO file to. I have a whole bunch of them in here from using different distributions, CentOS, Kali, and Ubuntu primarily. In this case, we're going to go with Ubuntu Server 12.04. The difference between the server version of Ubuntu Linux and the standard desktop version, the setup process lets you pick different software packages you may want to install, like LAMP. They're more oriented towards a server base, whereas and it also does not have a desktop environment by default. So the server, you're just going to get a text line and that's it. There's just a console. A desktop version, has icons, more things to make it a little more usable in front of it, but it does take some resources. Obviously, this is going to be just a VPN server, so all we need to do is get the VPN server going. We don't need all the overhead of a full graphical interface. We're going to set up with a command line. So we're going to use AMD 64 server, and to note, this one says AMD 64 does not mean you have like an Intel chip that you don't want to use the AMD version. You still want to use the AMD 64 version. All it is AMD actually created these 64-bit extensions, so that's what it's referring to. Intel licenses 64-bit processor extensions from AMD. So, okay, so I like to use the ISO. It makes it a lot quicker right off a hard drive. So we'll call it Open VPN Test, right? And sure, why not Open VPN Test? Password will be Open VPN Test, and confirm Open VPN Test. Just to make it easy, and we'll call the machine Open VPN Test. Now what we have to do is we have to tell the computer where we want to store our files, our VM machine. A VM machine has to be stored in a folder when you're using a Type 2 hypervisor in VMware Player. So, like off of your C drive or D drive or E drive, whatever you want it, whatever drive you're storing this on, you have a folder that all the files for that virtual machine are stored in. In this case, I'm just going to store it into the /open VPN test folder. You can assign different amounts of space. Obviously, this being just a VM machine, it really is not going to need much space. OpenVPN would all I'm going to show you how to set up on it. So OpenVPN, it doesn't take much space. We're going to put 10 gigabytes, and that's probably more than plenty for this. So when you get to this item, we can customize the hardware. So we can change how much RAM goes on this device. A whole host of different items we can change here. So what I definitely like to do is I like to have the network connection bridged. Simply because it'll pull a 192 address or whatever your IP scheme is off your router versus a private IP inside the host address. So it's going to give it a separate IP off of your router essentially. So that's why I'd recommend doing that. Memory we can move this for demo purposes. I'm going to move this to 2 gigs, maybe make it a little bit quicker for the install. You can change the number of processor cores if you want to have more than one core. For a VPN server, this is quite a bit. It's plenty. But according to what you plan on using this virtual machine for, you may want to up the number of cores this machine has access to. If say you're running something that's to be more database heavy or heavy on the computational side, you might need more RAM. You might need more number of processor cores. But for my use, this is going to be plenty. So I will hit finish. Also, you can have power on the virtual machine after creation, which means it's going to start the machine up after we make it. So it's going to create the machine. Okay, so starts up your OpenVPN, takes you right into the installer. So we're going to walk through installing OpenVPN. I should say walk through installing Linux, Ubuntu Linux, and then I'm going to have another video that shows you how to install OpenVPN. So we're going to click inside here. We'll use our keyboard, and we're going to install Ubuntu Server. So it's going to start through. Yes, English. Yes, United States. Let's see. We're going to say the tech keyboard layout, no, and just choose where we are. Keyboard layout, English, US. Okay, so it's going to start copying some files. At different points, it's going to ask us, what we want to install for hardware packages. Or sorry, I should say, my apologies, want to install for software packages. So it might install something like a LAMP stack. LAMP, L-A-M-P, it's used for web hosting typically. It stands for, the L stands for Linux, the A stands for Apache, which is a web server. M stands for MySQL, and P stands for PHP. It's called a LAMP stack. It's just an acronym for those 4 items. So we'll call the host name Ubuntu OpenVPN, because that's what I'm going to show you how to do with this VPN. Let's see, we'll call the username OpenVPN. Sure, why not OpenVPN? And how about OpenVPN for the password as well? Obviously, if you're setting this up, I'd recommend you pick a more secure password. Since this is simply a demo, it's not actually my real OpenVPN server in a home. Obviously, it's much more secure. I'm just choosing insecure login so it's easy and fast to log in. Okay, so you have the option to encrypt your home directory, basically anything inside your home folder, which is kind of like the My Documents equivalent of a Windows machine. It's just basically where you keep all your files. If you want to encrypt that or not, I'm going to say no. I really don't care too much at this point. Again, it's a demo machine. Potentially, you may want to do that if you are going to be using this to store any type of sensitive information. So, is the time zone correct? We're going to say yes, it is. So we're going to use the entire disk. Use the entire disk, easy way. So you're going to see 10.7 gigs or so space. And then we'll write the changes to the disk. It's essentially a little bit, not quite as pretty as a Windows install, but if you've installed Windows off of like a Windows 7 CD or XP CD or 8 CD, it's definitely going to be similar in prompts. Again, not quite as pretty graphically, but the idea is the same, partitioning disks and so forth. So we'll let this run through, and hopefully it should get done here pretty quick. That would be the hope. Now, OpenVPN, so I should say the different distributions of Linux do have different ways to install packages like OpenVPN. So in this case, there's Deb packages for Debian. Ubuntu is based on Debian, which is one of the Linux distros. There's CentOS, which is Community Enterprise Operating System. Basically, it's a free version that's very, very similar to Red Hat. It's almost identical to it, which is used a lot in commercial and hosting. So we're not going to use a proxy in this case. So just enter. Another thing you might notice is my mouse. I have no mouse, and I can't. If you try to move your mouse, it's not going to work. At the bottom of the screen, you'll say press Control Alt to release the mouse cursor. So a server version of Ubuntu Linux, it captures, so to say, your keyboard and mouse when you're interacting with the VM. If you push the Control Alt, though, it's going to release it, and you're going to see my mouse can move again. At the bottom, it will say, if you want to click on the virtual screen again, and then I'm back into the VM. That's something else to note. But yeah, as I was saying, the different distributions of Linux, they do have different ways to install software packages. you know, Red Hat has RPM, which is Red Hat Package Manager. In this case, we're going to be using dpkg, which is the Debian Package Manager, so dpkg Debian Package. And since Ubuntu is a derivative of Debian Linux, they inherited that particular package manager. There's also things like apt-get, which is a little bit different. A Debian package is essentially, and also RPM for Red Hat or CentOS, it's a single file install, almost like an MSI for Windows, one of those Microsoft installer files for Windows. You download that and it installs the program. It's a single file versus a multiple file install, like if you put a CD in and you have the install.exe and there's a whole host of files that copies off a disk. That's kind of synonymous with apt-get, and which is another way to install software in Ubuntu, and also yum, Y-U-M, is a way to install software packages in Red Hat based distributions. So this thing's still running here. We're going to give it a bit of time to complete. Okay, great. So you can configure automatic updates. I think it's a good idea, especially if you're running this as a server, to install server updates automatically. Really good idea. So, and this is what I was talking about, the different items that you can install. So if you want to install OpenSSH server, you can do that. Actually, it will come pre-installed. I want to make sure that we have the most recent version though, so we're going to So OpenSSH server is a little bit different. OpenSSH is for like a telnet but secure. A DNS server, LAMP server we talked about. Maybe you want to run your own mail server. Another database server, different type of SQL server. Samba is like similar to network shares, kind of like you'd have on Windows. Java server may install virtual machines on this. It can actually come out of the box that way. Or manual package. We're going to do none of it. We're just going to continue on as it is and install none of those extra packages. Again, all we're going to do on this particular machine is install OpenVPN and configure it. So as it goes through, this is going to install Ubuntu Linux. It's going to continue to install this on the machine, so we're going to let it run through, and it looks like it's closing in on being completed. Again, if you install Windows or anything like that, this is going to be pretty simple for you to do. There's nothing all that challenging about doing this, in my opinion. But as if you might not have done this before, there could be some things that could trip you up. But if you follow the items I've selected as I went through, you should be just fine. And VMware Player and Ubuntu Linux are both free as well, so there's no cost involved in doing any of this. So it's almost done, it looks like. Yes, we're going to install the bootloader. So we'd say yes to grub if you get to that point and it asks you. So we're going to finish the installation, hit continue. So it's going to wrap up the install and then reboot the machine. So we don't have to do anything, it will just boot the machine. And very shortly we will have the Linux install completed. It's actually just starting after running it. And here we have the login screen. So our login name was OpenVPN, and our password was also OpenVPN. And we're logged in. So that's all it really takes to install Ubuntu Linux in a virtual machine. I'm going to wrap this video up here shortly, but I'm going to continue right on with a separate video that's going to go into installing OpenVPN and setting up port forwarding and whatnot, so you have access to your network from an external location. So I'm going to wrap this video up. Thanks for watching. I hope that helps somebody install Ubuntu Linux on a virtualized platform. And thanks, and have a great day.